Welcome back to another episode of the Tracy Take. Today we are talking about the Arizona Cardinals. But before we get into that, make sure you subscribe to this video and also hit the like button as well and hit the notification bell so you can get notified when we make new content. Ryan, I got to be honest. I think it was the Bills game last year. I hadn't really paid too much attention to Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals, but I think it was just on TV in Nashville, Tennessee. I was watching the game, and obviously everyone knows how it ended. But man, what a fun team to watch! I'm really looking forward to seeing this team. They have Kyler Murray has really grown. He's a fun guy to watch, but also just the pieces that they have around him. DeAndre Hopkins, now AJ Green, James Conner, their new running back, and um, did they re-sign Larry Fitzgerald? I don't think they did.
No, he's still kind of
He's still kind of
debating whether he
rolling.
wants to retire or not.
Okay, yeah. I honestly in Arizona, I think they'll tell him you can do whatever you want, and so.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but anyways, I'm really looking forward to watching this team this year. I think they got a solid chance to win the division and maybe make it a playoff run. But what
Mhm.
are your overall thoughts on the Cardinals and the moves that they've made this offseason?
So I think the Cardinals are going to be a really, really exciting team in 2021. Talent-wise, they are absolutely through the roof. I mean, all-pro safety in Buda Baker, Chandler Jones, J.J. Watt. They just drafted a hot young rookie linebacker in Zaven Collins, who I think
Mm-hmm.
will end up having a very impactful career. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they did a few offensive line renovations to try and bolster up some of that. Kyler Murray is a great prospect. He kind of reminds me of like a Lamar Jackson, but with a much stronger arm.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously the highlight of the offseason was bringing in AJ Green to kind of complement DeAndre Hopkins. And so I really think that they have a talented team and they have a base that could perform really well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Well, and I was just thinking about it. Is there a slot receiver that I'm missing, or is Rondell Moore kind of slide in there? There.
Rondell Moore, I think, is going to kind of slide in there. I've seen some training camp footage from him, and he looks like he's doing really well. I know Cliff Kingsbury runs a little bit more of a college style offense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think Rondell Moore will be a great asset to use. They did draft Andy Isabella 2 years ago, but that just hasn't quite worked out. And I think Rondell Moore is kicking him to the curb. So
Well, and I think DeAndre Hopkins and AJ Green's going to bring so much attention on the outside.
mhm.
A speedy slot receiver like Rondell Moore could be very successful. But
Yeah.
obviously, we know about Kyler Murray and how athletic and really how gifted he is as well with his receivers. But we were talking before this episode a little bit about the running back situation. We
Mhm.
did sign James Conner over from Pittsburgh. I think that's a pretty solid option in my opinion. I know offensively, the offensive line is ranked better pass wise than run wise. But
Mhm.
you have some concerns about James Conner. What are those again?
Yeah, so I mean, James Conner's time in Pittsburgh was mostly highlighted by his sophomore season in the NFL, where he kind of broke out after Le'Veon Bell left. But ever since then, he's just kind of been mediocre. He didn't have the biggest presence out of the backfield as a pass catcher, which in this Arizona system is something that is huge. Cliff Kingsbury loved to utilize not DeAndre Swift. His name is
Kenyon
escaping
Drake.
me. Yeah,
Uh,
Kenyon Drake.
Kenyon
Yeah.
Drake. Yeah.
Sorry, both SEC guys. But he loved to utilize Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake was actually responsible for 42% of the Cardinals' points that came from skill position players last year.
Hmm.
So that is almost half of their offense is going to Oakland. And so that for me presents a really big issue, especially when you relied on one player to produce so much, and then he's gone, and then you try to replace him with a player that kind of has a totally different skill set. James Conner's not as much of a finesse runner as Kenyon Drake was, and so that to me is a bit concerning.
Hmm. No, and that's a fair point. And that was one of the things. If there's one concern about the Arizona offense is I felt like at times they were similar to the Bills. They have a better running game than the Bills, but they're so effective passing the ball. They sometimes feel like they could get a little bit
Yeah.
one dimensional. And I see like Kyler Murray had over 800 rushing yards, but how many of those were on set plays? How many of those were
Mhm.
on passing plays specifically, and no one was open, so he just ran for however
Yeah.
many yards that he ran. And it's important, really, for teams, especially a team who's going to score as many points as Arizona. When you're up those 10 points going in the fifth quarter, trust me, I know about running the ball in game time situations. To have that kind of lockdown running play that running back can go and get you 3 or 4 yards. And when looking at James Conner's career so far, I don't think he has broken 2.5 yard average carry for a season. So
Mm.
that's going to be interesting to see. Now, some of that is also on the offensive line, but I will say, coming from Pittsburgh, they've always had historically pretty solid offensive lines. I know
Yeah.
we're not high on their offensive line this year, but normally they've had one of the better offensive lines in the season. So it'll be very interesting to see how they utilize James Conner, but also then the running back Chase Edmonds as well, who seems more like the receiving back. I think he had over 400 yards out of the
Yeah.
backfield last year receiving.
Mhm.
But
And if that is the case, and they want to utilize a two-back system,
yeah,
that is one thing. But you kind of lose the unpredictability of having a Kenyon Drake back there, where you could hand him the ball, you could throw him a screen pass, or he could run a wheel route out of the backfield. So
mhm,
that's one of the things to me that is a big concern. And then with that being said, if you don't have that elite, I guess, like safety valve,
mhm.
can that offensive line keep Kyler Murray upright long enough for him to be able to make the throws down the field to the AJ Greens and the DeAndre Hopkins and the Rondale Moores, which, I, especially in a division with defensive lines like this, that's going to be a pretty big concern. I feel like for them, they did end up adding. Let me see, I have his name written down. Uh, Rodney Hudson,
Yeah.
who is one of the best offensive linemen in the league over the past few seasons. And so I do think that will be a big addition, especially because he is a center and the centers kind of guide the offensive line. So that's just something that we will have to see. But I do, before we get into the schedule, want to quickly talk about the defense. And another concern that I have is the cornerback position.
Yeah.
So they basically swapped out Patrick Peterson for Malcolm Butler, which you traded a All-Pro Hall of Famer. They didn't trade it, but you basically gave up an All-Pro Hall of Famer for a one-play wonder corner who got cut from his last team.
Mhm.
And so that for me is a concern. And then also losing Hassan Reddick. Hopefully the additions of J.J. Watt and Zaven Collins can kind of pick up for the 12 and a half sacks that Hassan Reddick gave to the Arizona Cardinals defense last season.
Yeah.
But again, still that's a question mark for me. Is like, can those guys actually replace it? As J.J. Watt is in the latter years of his career, and Zaven Collins is so young, you never know how young linebackers are going to transition.
Yeah.
So there are question marks, but they're definitely not like severe question marks, in my opinion.
I would honestly say I feel like you know what you're going to get with Malcolm Butler. So
Inconsistency.
yeah, that's fair. He's consistently inconsistent.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's probably the best you could do to
Mhm.
fill to replace Patrick Peterson. I mean, those are big shoes to fill to begin with. Now it's
Yeah.
definitely a downgrade. I'm more concerned, honestly, though, with the defensive line. Uh, Replacing 12 and a half sacks from one player is going to be tough.
Yeah.
And J.J. Watt, who he is J.J. Watt, does have some injury concerns. And with Zaven Collins, that you don't really know how he's going to transition into the NFL. And also, he's more of a linebacker role as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
middle linebacker. Although he
yeah,
can play outside, and
he
he's
can.
big enough to play an edge rusher.
He can. I think that to me is a little bit more of the bigger concern because if you can't pressure the quarterback, it doesn't really matter what cornerback you have back there.
Yeah.
And so with
Mhm.
Hassan Reddick last year, he was able to consistently keep pressuring the quarterback,
Mhm.
had a dozen sacks. So that to me, I think is going to be the bigger thing to watch. Now, and I'm not saying Malcolm Butler is going to fully replace Patrick Peterson, but I'm just saying it would help if
Yeah.
you knew that would have consistent quarterback pressure.
And
So
I've said it on this podcast before. I always feel like it's better for, or it's easier for a defensive line to cover up for a lacking secondary than it is for a secondary to cover up for a lacking defensive line.
mhm, mhm.
And
Yeah,
so
that's true.
I this defense may be a big question mark, but again, I don't think it's nearly as big of question marks as Seattle has across the board.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that they are, in my opinion, the third ranked team in this division.
Mhm.
Uh, And to me, we'll get into the schedule here in a second, but the schedule that I've laid out is worst case scenario. I do expect their defense to probably regress a little bit, and I just don't necessarily have full faith in their offensive line, especially losing half of their production, or almost half of their production in Kenyon Drake. So uh, I
Yeah.
do. They do have a fairly tough start to the schedule. They have to go to Tennessee week 1, then they play Minnesota week 2, and then week 4 they go to the Rams. Then they play the 49ers week 5.
Mhm.
They go to Cleveland in week 6. And then they play Green Bay in week 8. And I mean, for the first half of the season, well, and then they also play San Francisco in week 9 again. And so for the first half of the season, I feel like they're just constantly battling. I mean, some of the top teams in both the AFC and NFC.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't help that two of the top teams in the NFC are in their division, but for me, that's just kind of how their cards fell. But then in the second half, they do get to play Seattle uh, twice. I have them splitting those games, but they could easily sweep them. And then they have to go to Chicago, and then they play uh, the Rams again, and then the Colts again. And I do have them losing to Dallas here in Week 17. Is definitely a coin flip game, and this Indianapolis game in Arizona is definitely a coin flip game as well. And so I think this is definitely their floor, but I don't think it helps them at all to be in
Yeah.
the second or the most competitive division in football. So
Well, yeah. Ideally, they love to be in the easiest division, but it's going back to that first half of the schedule that you were talking about. I think week 9 when they played the 49ers. Looking at it, I could see them honestly. They'll start now 3-0, and then if let's say they split games with the Rams and 49ers, they could have a winning uh, record. I see because
mm-hmm.
especially starting out with that first game against Tennessee, that's going to be a high scoring game. Um, as a
Mm-hmm.
betting man, I'm going to take the over on that game because
Yeah.
Giants defense is weak, but they can put up some points, and it's going to be very interesting to see how
Mm-hmm.
this team does because on like the Cardinals are going to put up a lot of points naturally, but their defense is a little bit better. So I feel like it's going to be an interesting road where they could win more games than expected. What was the record that you had for them again?
So I had them at 5-12, but like the Seahawks, I had them at 1-5 in the division. Uh, I just think that those teams with really strong defenses are just going to kind of overpower them. And I think that we'll get to LA in that video, but I think that LA is going to have a much stronger offense than they have in the past. And I
Mm-hmm.
think LA and the 49ers are going to be the top two teams in this division, uh,
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah,
because I think that they're going to be much more well rounded than the Seahawks and the Cardinals.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I think that's worst case scenario.
mhm.
I think they'll be around 500.
Yeah, and definitely, I could definitely see that. They have some coin flip games here, also too. So when we did this again, we did this before we did any of the 32 teams in the NFL. Like the
That's true.
Colts may not nearly be as good as we thought now that Carson Wentz is out 5 to 12 weeks,
Hmm.
uh, and so I mean Houston, that's an easy win. But look, like there are some games on their schedule that are definitely coin flip games that you could convince me that the Cardinals could easily win those games. So
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah. But all right, I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Tracy Take. If you have not already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below and that bell notification so we can send you guys a or a message every single time we post a video. And let us know what you thought down in the comments. If you liked what we said, tell us. If you disliked what we said, then let us know what you think we said wrong. So, all right.